congratulate Mike on his retirement. What many of you may not know is Mike and I worked together extensively when I was in the private sector at Dorsey and Whitney and then Great Plant Moody. I did telecom about half my time and represented MCI. And so we worked together in a lot of lovely Public Utilities Commission proceedings, and I wish him well, and he doesn't look that old to me at all, so, but great. Brent as well, thank you for your leadership, and thank you, Bill, as well for the warm introduction. I will tell you, I didn't know this, but Bill was honored as Boss of the Year by the Waseca Area Chamber of Commerce, so thank you for your great work, and all the legislators that are here. I know the Lieutenant Governor was here earlier, and we just have really formed a great coalition here to work on broadband issues that are going to be very important. I think you know that the work that you're doing is crucial. In the 1930s, we worked to bring electricity and phone service, and this is our issue of our time in terms of, especially in our rural areas, bringing broadband to homes. In early 2011, less than 60% of Minnesota households has access to broadband at speeds of at least 10 down and 6 up. Just 3 years later, in 2014, that number had climbed to 80%. This past year, we're at 89%. So we've clearly seen some improvement in our state, but when you get around like I do and visit all 87 counties every year, with 10 coming up this weekend, you hear a lot about what's not working as well as what is working. And I think we can do a better job, but we should realize that we've made some improvements which are really important. And it's bolstered by the numbers. According to the Governor's Task Force on Broadband, only 75% of rural Minnesota's households had access to high-speed broadband in 2015. And I think what's really changed is that while you might have access to some kind of broadband, and before people were complaining they had access to none, the needs have changed as businesses and farmers and students have become more and more reliant on high-speed broadband to do their homework, to get their orders in, and to do everything they need to do business. And that has been the striking change that I've heard about probably, I'd say, the last 2 years. I think they used to be able to get by in their own ways, and now their businesses require them to have higher speed access. Just some examples, one student wrote in an essay to his local carrier about how he would hold his phone up by a particular window at his home in northern Minnesota to try to download the information that he needed to get his homework. Or a tribal member in Leech Lake who told me that there was this one home that got Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden they saw all these kids hanging out in the yard, and they thought, what's going on? They were just trying to access Wi-Fi. I know you appreciate that story, Carrie, and it is a good story, but it's also kind of a sad story when you think of all these kids from this tribe, you know, trying to get in this yard just to do their schoolwork or to talk to their friends. Farmers, and this was one of my favorite ones, you know, they need to use new technology to do everything from detecting moisture in the soil, combining that data with the weather forecast to know exactly how much water they need at a time when we have limits on water, or tractors that use wireless broadband connection to send data back to the farm. And a number of farmers have told me they actually drive into town to the McDonald's parking lot and to the McDonald's, and they just set up there every morning and do their work because they can't get it out of their home. We've seen some amazing efforts by private business like Jenny O to actually build some of their own broadband lines out to farms so that they can do the checking and the work that they need with their farmers and their producers. And that's going to be part of the solution, but we know we have to do more. So I thought I'd update you on work that we've done in Washington in this area. Sometimes when I do updates on work in Washington, it's not that good, but this is a little better. I've worked closely with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utilities Service and the Federal Communication Commission's Universal Service Fund. As you know, those are two sources of money. From 2009 to 2014, the RUS financed $340 million in Minnesota telecom and broadband projects. That's more than $56 million a year. And this past August, Minnesota's 4 price cap carriers announced they were accepting $85.6 million per year for 6 years to extend broadband to 170,355 homes. That is pretty exact. So, and businesses across the state. And then there's support from the Universal Service Fund. In 2014, we received about $70 million to provide broadband in our rural areas from that fund. And I think one of the reasons your coalition is here, you know that one, that federal funding has to be spent in the best way as possible, and we need to change rules to make them work. But also that we can also supplement this with funding from the state. And I know the Lieutenant Governor was here and talked about that. But I still think there's more we need to do on the federal level. Last year, Senator John Thune, our neighbor in South Dakota, who sometimes is a Viking fan, when they're winning at least, and I led a bipartisan coalition of 61 senators. As you know, Senator Thune is a Republican who chairs the Commerce Committee, calling on the FCC to act on standalone broadband. Outdated Universal Service Fund rules require purchase of broadband be paired with the traditional landline phones. We know how important the landline phones are in our rural areas and how important it is to keep having a portion of that Universal Service Fund go to landline, but we felt that more should be devoted to broadband. And just about 2 weeks ago, the FCC Chairman Wheeler and Commissioner O'Reilly, this was a real bipartisan effort on the commission, they came to visit me and to inform me that they've reached an agreement actually on an order for reforms to the Universal Service Fund for rate of return carriers that will include support for standalone broadband. This was an agreement they reached working with the national associations, and the order's been circulated to the other commissioners, and a vote is imminent. So this is what Thune and I have been working on, and we'll see all the details and how it affects our Minnesota carriers. But this was some progress because there's a lot of money in that Universal Service Fund, as you all know. I submitted some recommendations to the newly formed Broadband Opportunity Council, and they listened, and in September they released a report with some clear recommendations for federal action, including continuing investment through financing programs like RUS and streamlining, which I just mentioned, the permitting process for deployment of broadband infrastructure on federal lands. We've been working on this dig once for a while, and we hope we're going to make some progress. The bill that was mentioned, actually I got Senator Steve Daines of Montana and Cory Gardner of Colorado, 2 Republicans on the bill, and they are both on the Commerce Committee with me, so I'm hoping that we can make some progress on that. As was mentioned, what that bill does is, first of all, it supports state broadband coordinators like we have here in Minnesota. Second, it requires federally funded highway projects to dig once and install the broadband conduit while they're doing construction. And third, by requiring the GSA to work with federal agencies to consolidate and streamline contracts and fees for deploying infrastructure on federal property, it will move broadband more quickly. So that's what it does, and the whole idea here is to get the federal funding into broadband, and at the same time make it easier, as I know you've discussed, you had a speaker earlier talk about some of the rules and regulations, make it easier to do it on the federal and state levels. So that's what we've been up to. I am really devoted to this issue, and I feel like we had, when I first got to the Senate, there was a lot of interest, and we got the stimulus bill done. There was some quick short-term money, and a lot of people applying for grants. Some people had to stop them, some people didn't. But I think we always knew that was kind of a patchwork solution and that we had to do something bigger. And to me, the things we can do bigger are, one, state by state, as you're doing in Minnesota here, try to supplement the federal money. And then secondly, on the federal side, look for the money where we can find it. And the Universal Service Fund, if done right, so it still doesn't cut in unduly to our small rural telephone companies, who a lot of their customers rely on landline service, and we have to remember that, but find ways, because that is a huge chunk of change in that Universal Service Fund. So the more we can figure out how to funnel into broadband, along with the existing grant programs we have out of the Commerce Department and out of the Ag Department, I think it's going to be a real positive thing. And again, it's been really fun to visit with Minnesotans across the state and hear these great projects that are going on, and hear when they finally get some service and what a change it makes, whether it is our resort owners up in northern Minnesota who have to compete with those people from Canada who have better Wi-Fi, and it's real hard to compete if your competitors right across the border, where they can literally see Canada from their porch, have Wi-Fi and you don't in your own state. So that's one thing, one glaring example of the problem. The problems with hospitals, other emergency providers that have trouble getting through. We know more and more citizens are going to be texting and emailing. Their criminal justice issues are going to be writing in when something goes wrong instead of calling, and some of them don't even have landlines. We have to be ready to accommodate that. And then we have our businesses, and we're so fortunate to have our businesses in Minnesota spread out across the state. We have great ones in the metro, as Representative Thiessen knows, but we have so many strong businesses, whether it's Toro down in southern Minnesota, or Ormo, or when you go up north, Cirrus outside of Duluth, or the great work that we have at DigiKey. I'm going to forget people now. Schwann's, Marvin Window, and you just it's an incredible thing we have going, where we have some major companies as well as small businesses. We are 5th in the country for agriculture out of Minnesota. 5th, that is really high. Yet we are 2nd per capita for Fortune 500 companies. The only one that beats us out is Connecticut, and they're the size of an iceberg. So the point here is that we have this incredible mix and diversity in our businesses, and we also have this incredible diversity in terms of where they're located. And that really makes us, I think, gives us that kind of momentum that we need to be on the cutting edge of spending resources on broadband, because it's been really good for our state, and it's one of the reasons that we have the fact that we have these businesses located all over the state. One of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Our metro area has, depending on the month, the lowest unemployment rate in the country, and we want to do everything to keep these businesses in Minnesota. My favorite business story recently was that despite the fact that one day, I think it was 2 years ago, the Range Rover on Mars, this is true, you can Google it if you have Wi-Fi, the Range Rover on Mars found a temperature that was actually, this is true, one day, it was actually warmer on Mars than it was in International Falls, Minnesota. And despite that, somehow our business community talked the NFL into bringing the Super Bowl to Minnesota in January, all right? And so we want to keep that kind of business support, and not just in the metro, but throughout the state. And I think you all know the way we do it is giving them the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure to get goods to market. But more and more, as we compete in this increasingly global economy, it's about getting the information over broadband and over the internet. So keep